You are tired, but not the kind of tiredness that sleep can fix. Not the kind that disappears after a weekend off or a long vacation. This is a soul-deep exhaustion. It's the kind of heavy, hollow ache that sits in your chest because you have spent years being the one who gives, the one who adjusts, and the one who absorbs everyone else's friction. You work harder than anyone else. But that's not what drains you. What drains you is the agonizing weight of being taken for granted while you pretend it doesn't hurt. Look at your patterns. You are the first person people message when they need a favor, but the last person they check on when the world goes quiet. You reply in seconds to people who take 3 days to give you a one-word answer. You say, "Sure, no problem," even when your schedule is drowning and your mental health is fraying. You tell yourself this is maturity. You tell yourself it's kindness, patience, or strength. But let's be honest. Something inside you is breaking because you are trading your self-respect for crumbs of validation. Notice the cruel reality of your life. You see people who do less than you, care less than you, and sacrifice nothing. Yet they receive more respect, more attention, and more consideration. You ask yourself, what am I doing wrong? Here is the cold, hard truth. You aren't failing. You're just too easy to use. You have made your kindness so predictable and your presence so available that you have become background noise. You don't lack value. You leak value. You have taught people that there is no price to pay for your time and no consequence for their neglect. Harmlessness is not a virtue. It is invisibility. And invisibility invites use. Remember this. Respect does not come from how much you tolerate. It begins exactly where your tolerance ends. Stop confusing endurance with dignity. Stop offering for free what others should be earning. If you don't set a price for your soul, the world will continue to consume you until there is nothing left. To understand why good people are so often used, we need a framework that doesn't soften reality. That's where Niccolò Machiavelli comes in. Not because he celebrated cruelty, not because he promoted manipulation, but because he refused to pretend human nature was gentler than it actually is. He described how people behave when incentives are clear, not how we wish they would behave in ideal conditions. Machiavellian thinking is often misunderstood as heartlessness. It isn't. It's precision. It asks a question most people never stop to ask. When someone crosses your line, what actually happens next? If the honest answer is nothing, then the line wasn't real. You didn't have boundaries. You had expectations. And expectations without consequences don't alter behavior. This perspective forces an uncomfortable realization. The world does not respond to intention. It responds to consequences. Kindness on its own doesn't signal strength. Kindness without awareness signals predictability. And predictability is easy to exploit, even by people who don't see themselves as cruel. This is where the purpose of this video becomes clear. It's not here to make you colder or more cynical. It's not here to teach manipulation. It exists to help you stop being naive in a world that quietly rewards those who understand power dynamics. Goodness without self-respect isn't protected. It's exposed. The shift begins here, not by hardening your heart, but by sharpening your clarity. Because the world doesn't reward goodness alone. It rewards self-respect when it's backed by action. Once you see how the world actually works, you realize the problem was never your kindness. It was the silent deal you made with it. There is a trap almost no one warns you about. You give, but what you really want is to be understood. You stay quiet, hoping to be noticed. You tell yourself you're being patient and loving. But beneath that surface lies a hidden contract. It sounds like this. If I'm easy to be around, people will treat me well. If I sacrifice enough, they'll choose me. In reality, you never explain the terms, yet you expect the reward. When it doesn't come, frustration builds. Unspoken expectations are the birthplace of resentment. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Being harmless does not invite respect. It removes it. In nature, predators don't attack what can fight back. They go after what won't resist. Humans follow the same pattern. When you never show friction or walk away, you send a clear message. There are no consequences here. Respect doesn't come from how much you tolerate. It comes from what you refuse to accept. Harmless is not virtuous. It is invisible. And invisibility invites use. Think about the people you genuinely admire. They aren't the ones who endure everything in silence. They are the ones who calmly say, "This doesn't work for me," and mean it. Respect begins where tolerance ends. Stop confusing endurance with strength and silence with dignity. People will keep taking what you keep offering for free. Once you understand why being nice quietly invites exploitation, the next question becomes unavoidable. If kindness isn't protecting you, what is missing? The answer lies in shifting your role from being a resource, something to be used and depleted, to becoming a sovereign, the architect who owns and governs their own life. This transformation is built on 4 fundamental laws that will redefine your value and reclaim your power. These are the pillars of your ascent from invisibility to authority. 1. Scarcity. Why pulling back creates value. There is a force stronger than logic, stronger than promises, and stronger than good intentions. It lives deep in the human brain, deciding what gets valued and what gets ignored. That force is scarcity. You don't need to be taught this. You already live by it every day, even if you've never named it. Think about water and gold. Water keeps you alive. Gold doesn't. Yet water is cheap, while gold is hunted, guarded, and fought over. Why? Because water is everywhere, and gold is not. The brain doesn't measure value by usefulness. It measures value by availability. What is always there becomes invisible. What can disappear becomes precious. This rule applies to people, especially to you. Think about someone you know. Let's call him Mark. Mark is the guy at the office who says yes before the question is even finished. When a teammate forgets a deadline, Mark stays late to fix it. When a friend needs a ride at 2 a.m., Mark is already in his car. He replies to every text in 3 seconds. He thinks he is indispensable. He thinks his self-sacrifice is building a bank of goodwill. But look at how the world treats Mark. He isn't the one getting promoted. He isn't the one people call when they want to celebrate. He is the one they call when they have a problem they don't want to deal with. Because Mark is always reachable, his presence stops feeling special. It starts feeling automatic. He has become like the electricity in the wall, necessary, but completely unnoticed until it's gone. People don't thank the outlet for the power. They only get annoyed when the lights flicker. Availability has killed Mark's value. Look around your own life. There's the person like Mark. And then there's the person whose calendar feels structured and whose time feels intentional. Who gets respected more? It's never the one who's endlessly free. This isn't arrogance. It's perception. When you are always available, the brain assumes you have nothing better to do. And if you have nothing better to do, your time must not be worth much. That judgment happens instinctively. If everyone can reach you anytime, nobody values you. You may tell yourself you're being generous, But generosity without limits turns into self-erasure. Every time you drop your own work to respond to a non-urgent ping, you send a message. My time is flexible. Yours is the priority. Compare time to money. If Mark let people take $10 from his wallet every day, he'd eventually call it theft. Yet, he lets people take 10 minutes here and an hour there, and he lets it slide. Money can be replaced. Time cannot. When you give it away freely, you teach the world that your life is a clearance sale. Contrast this with the people who seem magnetic. They aren't rushing or apologizing. They simply have direction. They are building something, a career, a body, a skill. Their scarcity isn't a game. It's a result of their focus. When your energy has a direction, access to you becomes limited by default. Here's the uncomfortable part. Some people will drift away when you stop being easy. Let them. They weren't attached to you. They were attached to your access. When that access closes, the truth reveals itself. Scarcity doesn't make you lonely. It makes your relationships honest. You don't become valuable by asking to be valued. You become valuable by allocating yourself differently. When your yes becomes rare, it finally gains weight. When your no becomes calm and consistent, it reshapes the world's expectations of you. Scarcity is not about withholding punishment. It's about protecting your energy, your attention, and your life. The moment you stop being everywhere for everyone is the moment you finally become someone people notice. Not because you demanded it, but because your presence is no longer guaranteed. 2. Integrating the shadow, the sovereignty of limits. You probably believe you have boundaries. Most people do. You tell yourself, I'm just patient, or I don't like conflict, or it's not worth the argument. But look closely at what actually happens. Every time someone pushes, you move. Every time they cross a line, you soften it. What you call boundaries are really habits of retreat, and that's why nothing changes. Think about the small moments you barely register anymore. Someone speaks to you in a tone that's disrespectful. You feel it instantly, a tightness in your chest, a flicker of anger. But you smile it off. You tell yourself they didn't mean it like that. Someone takes your time without asking, schedules over you, expects instant replies. You say, it's fine, even though it isn't. You don't confront. You don't pause. You adapt. And every adaptation teaches people something dangerous. That you will move so they don't have to. Here's the truth most people never face. A boundary is not something you feel. It's something you enforce. If nothing happens after it's crossed, it was never a boundary. It was a preference. Boundaries without consequences are wishes. And wishes do not shape behavior. People don't change because you're hurt. They change because the cost becomes real. This is where it gets uncomfortable. You don't lose respect because you're kind. You lose respect because you negotiate against yourself. You explain too much. You apologize for having limits. You argue as if your needs are on trial. The moment you start justifying, you've already lost ground. You've turned your boundary into a debate, and debates invite pressure. Real boundaries sound simple. Not aggressive, not emotional, just final. I won't accept being spoken to like that. I'm not available for this. That doesn't work for me. Then you stop. No explanation, no apology, no back and forth. Silence after a boundary is what makes it real. The silence is the consequence. It forces the other person to sit with the limit instead of pushing past it. Notice how rare this feels to you. That's because you've been trained to smooth things over, to manage other people's discomfort before your own. You think holding silence will make you look cold, rude, difficult. What it actually does is signal self-respect. It tells the world there's a line here, and stepping over it changes the outcome. Think of someone who always seems to be treated well. Not feared, not loud, just respected. They aren't constantly explaining themselves. They don't chase understanding. When something feels wrong, they create space. And if the behavior continues, they withdraw access. That's the part most people skip. They say the boundary, then keep showing up the same way. Same availability, same energy, same forgiveness. The message becomes clear. Nothing really changed. Boundaries only work when your behavior changes after they're crossed. Less access, less responsiveness, less effort. Not out of spite, out of alignment. You are not punishing anyone. You are recalibrating what they get from you. That recalibration is what teaches people how to treat you. If you've spent your life backing up to keep the peace, this will feel unnatural, even cruel. But ask yourself this: how much peace have you really had? Or have you just been quiet while resentment grew? Boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are filters that let the right people stay. And the moment you stop retreating, you'll see who respects you enough to adjust, and who only stayed because you kept stepping back. 3. Emotional autonomy, refusing the burden of others. What comes next is the shift that makes boundaries real, not through words, but through the quiet way you move and respond. It starts with questioning the most exhausting habit you've never challenged: the belief that you are the world's emotional shock absorber. You've been trained to believe that peace means everyone feels okay. You sense tension in a room and rush to smooth it out before anyone even asks. Someone sounds slightly annoyed, and you immediately try to fix it. Someone is disappointed, and you feel personally responsible. You call this being the glue of the group. In reality, you are slowly erasing yourself. Think about your own social circle. There is always that one person who acts like an unassigned therapist. When a conflict hits the group chat at 2 a.m., they are the first to wake up and fix it. When two friends argue, they are the one frantically calling both sides to save the vibe. They apologize for silences they didn't cause and carry the weight of moods they didn't create. On the surface, everyone calls them kind. But in reality, they are the most exhausted person in the room. They've become so reliable that their presence is no longer a gift. It's an expectation. They are treated like a safety net. People only remember they exist when they are about to fall. They aren't being valued for who they are. They are being consumed for the comfort they provide. They've traded their own peace to become a shock absorber for everyone else's chaos. This is the truth most people never accept. Fixing someone else's mood is a form of self-abandonment. The moment you take responsibility for how others feel, you hand them the remote control to your life. You stop acting based on your own values and start acting based on their potential reactions. You say yes to a weekend trip you're too tired for, just because you're afraid of the vibe changing if you stay home. You agree with opinions you don't hold, just to avoid an awkward debate. Underneath it all, it's fear. Fear of being seen as the problem. Here is the shift that changes everything. Other people's discomfort is not your responsibility. Let that land. Adults are allowed to feel frustrated. They are allowed to feel disappointed. They are allowed to be the difficult one in the room. Their emotions are not a fire you are required to put out. If you say no, and they react badly, it doesn't mean you've done something wrong. It means you've stopped being their emotional cushion. Try this the next time a conversation gets heavy or a friend gets moody. Say nothing. Don't rush to fill the silence with a joke. Don't offer to fix the situation. Don't apologize for a tension you didn't create. Let the discomfort exist. You will feel the anxiety spike in your throat. Guilt will whisper that you're being cold. Stay still. That discomfort is not danger. It's withdrawal. You are breaking a lifelong addiction to being the fixer. Watch what happens next. Some people will respect your new presence. They will find it grounded and solid. But others will push harder. They will act even more upset, trying to force you back into your old role. That reaction is a gift. It is information. It reveals who actually values you as a person and who only valued you as a tool to manage their own emotions. Emotional autonomy is when your inner state no longer depends on someone else's approval. It is the strength to say, "I see that you're upset," and still remain at peace with yourself. You don't become cold when you stop managing everyone's feelings. You become free. You become free to act from clarity instead of fear. You finally let other people carry their own emotional weight, just as you have been carrying yours alone for years. Their discomfort is not your responsibility, but your life and your pieces. 4. Stop maintaining. Start building. When you stop managing other people's emotions, something uncomfortable becomes impossible to ignore. You suddenly see how much of your time, energy, and focus has been spent keeping other people afloat. And that clarity leads to a deeper realization. You weren't building a life, you were maintaining access. This is where the real shift begins. Not at the level of behavior, but at the level of role. For most of your life, you've been playing the role of the helper, the one who fixes, the one who steps in, the one who makes sure things don't fall apart. Helpers are praised early. They're called dependable, kind, essential. But over time, helpers don't rise. They get consumed. A helper's value comes from reaction. Someone messes up, they clean it. Someone struggles, they compensate. Someone avoids responsibility, they quietly absorb the cost. Their days are full, but nothing is being built. No momentum, no ownership, just constant output. At night, they're exhausted, yet nothing in their own life feels solid or complete. Builders live by a different rule. Builders don't rush to fix what isn't theirs. They don't confuse urgency with importance. Their energy flows inward first, into their skills, their health, their discipline, their future. They understand that every ounce of energy spent rescuing others is energy not invested in themselves. And they choose accordingly. Look at the contrast in real life. One person stays late correcting other people's mistakes. Another leaves on time because they're training, studying, or creating something of their own. One is thanked quietly and forgotten quickly. The other is questioned, sometimes resented, but ultimately respected. Only one of them accumulates leverage. This is where guilt tries to pull you back into the old role. The moment you stop helping, a voice inside says you've changed, that you're selfish, that you're letting people down. But you're not abandoning people. You're abandoning a pattern that trained others to lean while you carried. Helpers are consumed. Builders are respected. Here's the truth most people never confront. Every time you fix someone else's situation, you delay the construction of your own life. Every brick you carry for someone else's house is a brick you didn't place in yours. Stop carrying bricks for houses you'll never live in. The people who benefited from your constant availability will resist this shift, not because you're wrong, but because you were convenient. When you start building, availability changes naturally. Not as a strategy, but as a consequence. Your calendar is filled with things that matter. Your energy gains direction. You no longer have room for chaos that isn't yours. And this alone changes how people treat you. Some drift away. Some rise to meet you. Some finally offer the respect they never gave before. That respect doesn't come from explanation. It comes from motion. People respect movement. They respect someone who is clearly going somewhere. A builder doesn't need to announce their value. Their focus makes it obvious. The transition from helper to builder feels like a loss, because it is. You lose an identity built on usefulness. You lose the comfort of being needed. But what you gain is far greater. Stability, self-respect, direction. Builders aren't drained, they're grounded. Helpers ask, who needs me right now? Builders ask, what am I creating with my life? One question keeps you busy. The other gives you something worth protecting. As you shift from building for others to building yourself, not everyone will celebrate the change. Some will push back. Not because you're wrong, but because the old version of you was easier to live with. The moment you stop building your life around other people, something predictable happens. The silence changes. The reactions change. The air around you feels heavier. Not because you've done something wrong, but because the version of you people were comfortable with is no longer available. When you were a helper, your presence felt safe. You fixed problems before they became inconvenient. You absorbed tension so others didn't have to. You made life easier for everyone around you, often at the cost of your own peace. That version of you was easy to like, easy to rely on, easy to overlook. But builders don't feel that way. Builders create friction. Builders disrupt expectations. Builders stop filling gaps that were never theirs to begin with. And when that happens, people notice. Not always with admiration, often with resistance. This is where the story usually breaks. Not because you can't handle the work of building, but because you struggle with the emotional backlash that comes with it. The comments start appearing. You've changed. You're not as available anymore. You're different now. These aren't observations. They're signals of loss. Loss of access. Loss of control. Loss of the version of you that made things easy. Here's the part no one prepares you for. Growth doesn't just cost effort. It costs approval. The more you build something solid for yourself, the more uncomfortable it becomes for people who benefited from you staying flexible, quiet, and small. That discomfort doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're crossing a threshold. When you stop carrying bricks for other people's houses, some of them won't ask why you're building your own. They'll accuse you of abandoning them. When you stop saying yes out of habit, some will frame your no as betrayal. When you choose yourself without apology, some will call it selfishness. And this is where the real decision lives. Not in your schedule, not in your productivity, but in your willingness to be misunderstood. You can build a meaningful life, or you can preserve your reputation as the nice one. You cannot do both. The next phase requires a different kind of strength. Not the strength to endure, but the strength to stand still while being judged. Because the final test of building yourself is not a success. It's whether you can live with being disliked without collapsing back into who you used to be. If there's one thing to take with you, let it be this. You were never meant to disappear so others could feel comfortable. You were never meant to earn love through exhaustion, silence, or self-erasure. The version of you that always said yes, always fixed, always carried the weight, was not noble. It was unsustainable. Choosing yourself will cost you something. It will cost you approval. It will cost you familiarity. It will cost you the illusion of peace that came from keeping everyone else calm. But what it gives you back is far greater. Clarity, energy, self-respect. A life that actually feels like it belongs to you. Some people will call you selfish. Let them. Some will say you've changed. You have. You stopped betraying yourself. You stopped shrinking to be digestible. You stopped mistaking tolerance for strength. And that shift is irreversible once you see it clearly. Remember this when guilt shows up dressed as morality. The price of being liked by everyone is being invisible to yourself. You don't owe the world your disappearance. If this resonated, don't just agree with it. Act on it. Choose one place where you stop overgiving. One moment where you hold the line. One decision where you build instead of fix. That's how this becomes real. You're not here to be consumed. You're here to be sovereign.